Imagine a perfect world in which employers and employees could truly trust each other. Managers could promise their employees, "We're going to help you transform your career." And employees could respond, "I'm going to help transform the business." And if someday they needed to part ways, they could still maintain a warm, lifelong, and mutually beneficial relationship. Whether you're managed by people or you're a manager, today's talk is going to give you the insights and tools to help you motivate and retain great talent by rebuilding that sense of trust and honesty between employer and employee. Wow, I forgot for a second. I normally don't do formal introductions, but for the purposes of video, I wanted to do like a super formal introduction. So I'm going to start all over again from the top because they insisted that I do this right. So I'll start one more time from the top. Imagine a perfect world in which employers and employees could truly trust each other. Managers could promise their employees, "We're going to help you transform your career." And employees could respond, "I'm going to help transform the business." And if they needed to part ways someday, they could continue to maintain a warm, lifelong, and mutually beneficial relationship. And whether you're a manager or whether you're managed by people, today's talk is going to give you the insights and tools to help you retain and motivate great talent by rebuilding the trust and honesty between employer and employee. Now, it seems like that's an impossible task. Companies today can't offer lifetime employment and treat their employees like family members. But you also can't build a lasting and innovative business when all of your people think of themselves as free agents. The solution to this is to stop thinking of your employees as either family members or free agents and start thinking of them as allies on a tour of duty with a shared mission. Today, I'm going to outline a new framework for the employer-employee relationship, which uses tours of duties and mission to allow managers to create mutually beneficial alliances with their employees. Not only does this help you keep those employees engaged, but will also inspire them to think and work like CEOs and entrepreneurs. Whether you're a tiny startup or a Fortune 500 company, you're going to learn the keys to managing talent in the networked age and gain practical strategies and tactics to make your company a talent magnet where innovation thrives. Let's begin. Whew, that was all formal and everything. Now I can go back to my normal self.
Great job.
Thank you. I appreciate that. They're very insistent on these things sometimes. So let's talk about employees today. I think we all want to have this kind of relationship where we say, we're going to be in this together forever. But guess what? That's the movies. What's the reality of today's workplace? It's a lot more like this. Your employees are definitely looking around. And you know what? Those other people are looking back. Take a look at the chart of the median job tenure by age and birth cohort. So you can see, basically have people based on different ages, and that's looking at their birth year and how long they spent at various companies. And every single generation is spending less and less time on the job. It's not just a millennial thing. Even older generations are spending less time on the job, and this is the new reality we all have to deal with. And especially in the technology industry. I'm from Silicon Valley, and in the technology industry, it's exceptionally bad. So if you take a look at these companies on the list, some of these are giant established companies, others are more startup-y, but the longest average tenure is at Facebook, maybe for not much longer, we'll see. The longest average tenure is at Facebook, where people spend 2 years there, and over at Uber, it's down close to 1 year. So this is the world we live in today. And when I ask myself why this is the case, I think a big reason is the lack of engagement. So this is a study that the Marcus Buckingham Company did in 2015, and they asked companies, all countries, all around the world, people in countries all around the world, how engaged they felt at work. And these are the figures they came up. And I always tell people, it sort of makes sense. Like the US and China, I can see that, very capitalistic countries. Beyond that, you've got India, that also makes sense. And so what I do is I tell people, we're going to play The Price is Right. So who has seen The Price is Right before? All right, so somebody tell me how The Price is Right works. What is the rule of the game? Anyone? What do you do in The Price is Right when you come? Guess the price. Guess the price and closest without going over. All right, so. Very excited about that frying pan. See, I grew up with Bob Barker. I think Drew Carey's doing a good job too. So let's imagine we're playing The Price is Right. So I'm Drew Carey. I have glasses, right? Bob never wore glasses. And I want you to guess the percentage of employees in the United States who told Marcus Buckingham that they were engaged. Closest without going over. Who wants to guess? Yes? 20%. 20%. That's a good guess. Who else? 27, 17. You see, sometimes people say 21, and then somebody says 1. It's like the people who watch the show a lot. So the actual answer is 19%. So 17% is correct in this case. And I always try to put this in context for people. I tell them, listen, is 19% good? Is 19% bad? Well, it turns out that 21% of Americans believe that aliens landed in Roswell, New Mexico in 1948. So it is a realistic statement to say that an employee is more likely to believe in alien autopsy videos than to say that they're fully engaged at work. Now, the crazy part is we kind of know what makes an employee engaged, right? If this is another chart, it's from the UK, but I figure they're human over there too. And what it shows you is that there are specific things which get people engaged that non-engaged people don't show. So for example, a lot of people will say, well, you know what? I know what's expected of me at work. Whether you're engaged or not engaged, you know what's expected. You have the equipment you need to do the job, and you're able to do your best every day. There are definitely differences, but the major differences come right up at the top. If you look at that, has somebody talked with me about my progress? Has somebody encouraged my development? Has somebody praised me? Do I feel like I have opportunities to learn and grow? And that, I would argue, is what's causing the problem. So why does this happen? Well, organizations like to say they're fighting in a war for talent. And I compare them to people who are big on collecting cars, right? We all know what people mean when they say we want great talent. They want people from this list of schools or who work for this list of companies. There are these shiny, beautiful talents. And they bring them in, and far too often the company takes those talents and then parks them. And says, hey, look, we got this amazing collection of talent. We must be awesome. But that is exactly the wrong way to convince people to stay. In fact, the right way to convince people to stay is to turn that parking lot 90 degrees and say, this is not a parking lot for talent. This is a starting line for talent. And we as an organization are not here to recruit the best people and hoard them, but we're here to recruit the best people and make them successful, hopefully at our company, but potentially at other places as well. Now, I referenced in my introduction that a lot of companies think of themselves as families. Anyone have a CEO who has told you the company is like a family? Anyone heard that recently? Yeah, a number of folks. And I understand why people would want to say this because, I love my family. Do you guys love your families? I think most of you do. And so when we say a company's like a family, we're saying we love each other, we support each other, we try to help each other. And I do think most companies should want to be like that. But the big distinction is I have a son who is actually turning 16 years old on Monday. So most of the way through, so managed to survive so far. Now, my son, Jason, I would estimate that he spends about half an hour to an hour a day on homework, and the remaining amount of time either watching YouTube videos, playing video games, or reading tweets from the President of the United States, all of which he does for amusement. And I'm on him because he gets like A's and B's, so he's like at a 3.5. And I'm like, come on, you spend like an hour a day on work. If you spent a little bit more, you'd be a straight A student. And he doesn't care. Now, the difference between a family and a company is if I were a company, I could go to him and say, Jason, I'm afraid this just isn't working out. Not sure if there's the right fit here. So we've got 2 weeks to transition. I've got Sanjay coming in. I'm hoping you can help train him on all the duties that you have, and then we'll wish you the best of luck. That's not the way a family works. And when you say a company is a family, and inevitably, even in small startups, somebody needs to leave or the family breaks up, then all of a sudden that illusion is shattered. And where do those feelings go? The other alternative is to talk about people being free agents. Now, here's a quick question. How many people in this audience joined the current company you work for right after you graduated from college? 2 people. So what does that tell us about the population of the world today? What it tells us is that most people are not necessarily going to join a single company and stay their entire career, although it is always great if you're able to do that. But rather, people are going to have multiple jobs. So how do you, as an employer, stand out amongst this sea of other employers? Now, one of the things that people have tried to do, starting in the 1980s, is basically say, listen, you know what? We're all free agents here. Jack Welch was asked by a reporter, what do you think? He says, listen, my people are on one-day contracts, and if they don't produce today, I fire them tomorrow. And the reporter said, Jack, what about loyalty? And Jack Welch, in his Jack Welchian way, I can't even imitate his voice. Those of you who remember his voice can hear it in your minds. He says, loyalty, get a dog. Now, I don't think it's a coincidence that maybe GE hasn't been going through the greatest of times recently. I do think that it's important, if you want to innovate, if you want to have people working hard for your company, that you not just say, well, you're a free agent, and as long as you get a better deal from me, you'll stay. But rather to build that sense of trust, to build that sense of loyalty. And so the answer, no surprise, because I have a book to sell, is the alliance, right? So what is an alliance? Think back to world history. It is a relationship between 2 parties who are independent, but who come together around some sort of shared mission or goal. So the example I like to use is from World War II, because that's a good war, and we can still talk about that one. And in that, the United States and the United Kingdom were allies against Nazi Germany. No, Nazis are bad. I think we can all agree on that. And when they're allies, it doesn't mean that the US and UK became one country. They remained independent, but they created treaties and they specified how they were going to work together to beat Hitler. Now, the reason it's difficult to do this in organizations is that most career conversations at work are broken. So how many people here have ever either asked or been asked the question, so where do you see yourself in 5 years? Yeah, most of us have. It's like written in a book somewhere, or maybe we learned it from watching TV. Who knows? So just take a moment to read the following cartoon for a second and see if you've ever heard that particular answer. So this is an interesting thing about job interviews. This is the very first interaction we have with someone who we want to join our company and become part of the organization, hopefully do amazing things. And we basically get to a point in the job interview where we say, now I want you to lie to my face. I'm going to ask you a question. I don't actually care about the answer. I just want you to lie to my face and give me the answer so I can check the box off. Does that seem like it's a good way to build trust and honesty? I don't think it is. I think there's a much better way to do this. And the way is to acknowledge that not every employee is going to be with the company for the rest of their career. And the way we acknowledge this is with a construct that we call a tour of duty. Now, this, again, comes from the military. And in the military, those who have served have done tours of duty in different places. And the tour of duty, in our definition, combines the particular job or thing that you're trying to work on with the mission. Right? It's not just about spending time somewhere and saying, well, I'm going to spend 2 years here, I'm going to spend 3 years here. It's what you accomplish during that time. And that's a shared mission. That's a mutually beneficial goal that's going to help you as an employer, and it's going to help the employee in their career. So the key thing is that for these tours of duty, they should really be transformational. Think about your LinkedIn profile. Most people can sort of picture in their mind. You've seen it before. You probably have a number of different entries in that LinkedIn profile. And what I would say is each of those entries ideally represents a transformation, represents an experience you went through, something you accomplished that now allows you to do more things than you did before. Like you could do more things after your first entry, and then more things after your second entry, and so on and so forth. Because each of those tours of duty that you went on expanded the possibilities of your career, made you more valuable to both your existing company and the companies in the market. Now, the reason that this forward-looking career progress is so important is because of the way people are motivated. So people are motivated by two different things: intrinsic motivations and extrinsic motivations. You've probably read about this in the book Drive by Dan Pink. And if you think about it, there are intrinsic motivations like autonomy, mastery, and purpose. You've probably heard those. You've had extrinsic motivations like compensation, punishment, and reward. Now, which of those two sets of three sounds more like the main tools that organizations use to manage their employees? Extrinsic, absolutely. But here's the funny thing about extrinsic motivation, and there's been a lot of research done on this. Even though extrinsic motivation can get compliance, can get people to do certain things, it actually does not make them successful. So I always tell people there's intrinsic motivation, extrinsic motivation. People who are extrinsically motivated perform more poorly and ultimately aren't as happy. And that's something that's undesirable for you as an employee, and it's undesirable for you as an employer as well. So what is it that you do in order to build that alliance? So as a manager, you acknowledge that the person might not be there for the entire rest of their career. One of the interesting stories that we use to illustrate this is actually a guy named Kevin Scott, who is currently the Chief Technology Officer of Microsoft. Prior to that, he was the VP of Engineering at LinkedIn. And we actually stole this from Kevin's actual practice. When Kevin was interviewing a new engineer to come into LinkedIn, he would ask them the following question during their job interview. So, what's the job you want to have after you leave LinkedIn? What's the next job you want to have? Now, that's pretty aggressive, right? It's not a question that I think you've ever heard from someone in a job interview. But what that did is it told the person, listen, you have permission to be honest. You have permission to talk about what you actually care about, the progression of your career. And maybe that's with this company, maybe that's somewhere else. But now that I've made it possible for you to speak honestly, we can actually talk about what matters to you. And what matters to employees, especially those millennial employees, I was talking with some folks about millennials earlier, the millennial employees who 50% of whom will look for another job this year, is that opportunity for growth that we saw on that poll back at the beginning. And what you can do is you can offer to help them transform their careers. Come work for me or come work for this company, and after your tour of duty, whether it's 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, you will be capable of doing things that you weren't capable of doing before. It will transform your career and accelerate it. Meanwhile, let's say you're one of the people who's being managed, you're an employee. What is it that you tell your manager? You tell your manager, I want to figure out how my work is going to help transform the company. I'm not just here to punch a clock or to just meet some random 5-point scale on an evaluation at the end of the year. I'm here to make a difference, because the way to make myself more valuable is to demonstrate that I can make a difference inside an organization. The key to doing all of this is that sense of trust, right? If you don't have that sense of trust, the employees don't feel comfortable talking about what they really want. And conversely, if you don't feel like you can trust your employee, are you really going to have them commit to your most important initiatives? So building that trust is what's so critical. And the problem with trust is that it's very easy to actually break that trust. Now, what is it that makes for trust? Well, one of the things I've heard is that trust is based on consistency over time, and maybe that's true. But I like looking at this example and thinking, you know what? Trust is actually about making and keeping your promises. That's what really matters. So if we think about the family versus the free agent, the families were making a promise but not keeping it because organizations can no longer offer lifetime employment. Free agency says, I'm not going to make you any promises. And you're not lying, but you're not building trust. The alliance allows you to steer that middle path. These tours of duty, these missions that you set up with your employees are the promises that you're making. You're making a promise to them that if they do this for you, it will help transform their career. And they're making a promise to you saying that they're going to make this happen. And when you continue to make and keep promises, maybe tour after tour after tour, for the gentleman in the front, you had worked for the same company your entire career. Which company is that? School district. Have you had the same job the entire time?
No, 3 different jobs.
Exactly. And each time you took a different job, if you were making a promise and they were making you a promise, and you delivered and they delivered, that built that bond that much more strongly. And so that's how you build long-term employees in a short-term world, by making and keeping these promises. And I will skip through this to the end because I'm short on time. I'll just say this. In the old days, the idea was that an employee would spend their entire career with the company. At the end of it, they would retire and get a gold watch. We've heard about this. None of us have ever actually seen this, right? This took place like decades ago. But we've heard about this. Well, what I'm going to suggest is that we update that concept for today's modern generations. Maybe instead of a classic gold watch, we're giving them a gold iWatch. But we're not doing that at the end of their career. That's something we're giving to them to show our appreciation after each tour of duty that they actually complete. Because each time that employee completes a tour of duty, they're keeping their promise to you, and then you need to keep their promise to them. And by bringing this new approach, whether it's to education or edutech or what have you, wherever you are, all of us are dealing with the fact that employees are defecting and leaving more than ever before. This is the approach that will help you deal with this new generation of employees and build long-term employees in a short-term world. And with that, I can open it up to questions for the last 3 minutes. So any thoughts or questions that people want to ask, I'm more than happy to go over them. I can also just tell funny stories or even sing if you want. I was at a conference yesterday where I actually rapped. I wasn't necessarily very good, but I went ahead and I did it anyways. Yes? Yeah.
But transcending the mindset after you've built the trust, how would you recommend starting that process? Because we do have a great relationship and we trust one another, but the risk taking that I'm willing to do is a very hard push and a big concept for them to really buy into.
Exactly. And so the question was, how do I, let's say I have this good relationship, trust with employees, how do I take it further? How do I build up from there? So a big part of it is, employees have been trained over time to be skeptical of different management movements. They're like, oh, I went to a conference, I heard a speaker, it's really awesome. Let me show you what we should do. And they're like, well, and there's an old Dilbert. It's like, is this going to blow over quickly or linger like the smell of a dead woodchuck? And so part of it is that same consistency. So if you're the principal, you're the role model, you're going to demonstrate that risk-taking and model it to them. And the really important thing is when they do actually take that risk, to make sure they're rewarded for taking the risk regardless of the outcome. One of the interesting stories from Google X, they do all the fancy moon shots, and originally the self-driving cars were there, and they have balloons that do the internet, they're working on nuclear fusion, all sorts of crazy stuff. The director is a friend of mine, a guy named Astro Teller, and he actually has started doing what he calls failure bonuses, where he actually provides bonuses to teams for failing. Now, why do they do that? Like, do we want to encourage failure? Well, not necessarily. But the key thing is that at Google, they have so much money that they could just keep going forever. There was a team that was working on turning water into gasoline. Like, well, that would be really cool if you could do it. And they had worked on it for like a year, and they figured out that they could actually do it, but that would take another 30 years to commercialize. And Google has plenty of money. They could have kept working on that for 30 years. They're like, no, these people are really smart. We want them to be working on other things that can deliver value sooner. So we're going to give them a bonus for declaring failure and moving on. Now, you don't have as much money as Google. Nobody does. But what you can do is when people do take that risk, reward them immediately for the risk, not just for the outcome that they have. Because what you want to do is you want to establish to people, taking risks helps my career, rather than taking risks and succeeding helps my career. Everyone knows that. Like, any time you succeed, you help your career. But just taking the risk ought to help their career. Can I do one more? One more. But we don't have to do one more either. So did you see Saturday Night Live, the lobster, the diner lobster? So they had this thing, the diner lobster. I've always wanted to sing Les Mis. I dreamed a dream of days gone by. Anyways, so I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much, everyone. Really appreciate it.